When you think of Australia, you think of kangaroos, koalas even. But when you think of Australian cars, the first thing that'll come to mind is the VT Commodore. And this is one that our family got for $20. Yes, I'm not kidding. After years of helping out a mate with this car and eventually finding him a new car, he sold it to us for only $20. And it's been a great A to B car for my mum to go to the shops and things like that. But it does need a few things done to it, so let's take a look at this Australian motoring icon. Here is the 23-year-old Series 2 Acclaim VT Commodore, which hasn't seen a good cleaning for quite some time. The VT Commodore was first introduced in 1997, featuring a sleek profile and styling that I find pretty attractive today. This car though has suffered some minor crash damage, but thankfully nothing too severe as it's still perfectly drivable. The rear bumper has seen its fair share of use, and the clear coat on the bonnet has turned really bad, which is super common with these cars if they haven't been garaged their entire life. In recent times it did see some shade under a tree that likes to drop leaves, so before we give it a spray down, let's remove some of it. Leaf litter can clog drainage vents, which are used to channel water through the bodywork. To make sure I do a good job, I'm being supervised by this Gawler. While you can definitely drive an old outdated car, you shouldn't use an old outdated web browser, so now's the perfect time to switch to Opera, the fast and secure browser with built-in AI tools. Opera is super fast and easy to download, with advanced features such as a free built-in VPN and ad blocker, all enabled with a few simple clicks of your mouse. The advantages of using Opera don't stop there. The generative AI service Aura is built right in. It's easily accessible in the sidebar. Make Opera look the way you want to. It's easy to enable dark mode and force all web pages to do the same. Changing your background is also a piece of cake. There's also integration with all the most popular music streaming apps. This seamless integration extends to your favorite messaging apps like Facebook and WhatsApp. Switching from another browser? Well, you're in luck. Transferring your bookmarks and passwords is quick and easy. And Opera is available on Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, and even on Chromebooks. A fairly new feature are tab islands, allowing you to group and easily organize open tabs together, freeing up space and making browsing effortless. If you're someone like me who often has heaps of tabs open, this is a game changer. So what are you waiting for? Enhance your web browsing experience today with Opera. Links are in the description and in the comments below. With the car rinsed off, let the foaming begin, and this is quite a lot of fun to do. Personally, I like cleaning things, but if you don't, getting a pressure sprayer might change your mind, and after letting the foam work its magic for a few minutes, it can be blasted off. Some of the clear coat also came off during this. I'd say it's probably best to avoid spraying too close to any seals, as the water is at such a high pressure it could probably cause damage if you're not careful. But this is a car with plenty of cosmetic issues already, so it really can't get much worse. This particular model has a pretty neat boot garnish. I really like that red plastic that extends all the way across. And when washing your car, be sure to open up doors and the boot to remove any leaf litter and debris that has formed. So it looks a little better after a clean. However, the clear coat on the bonnet has completely gone bad. Underneath is a 3.8 litre normally aspirated Ecotec V6 engine. This particular one has done almost 300,000 kilometers. Another thing to be mindful of is the condition of your wiper blades. Once they get brittle and worn, there is a chance they might not only be ineffective, they might also scratch your glass. Most cars use the same design, which are super easy to remove. And be sure to put the arms down while the blades are off to avoid shattering your windscreen. If bought at cost price, a new pair of blades can cost as little as $6. Most of the cheap ones found at major auto stores will do the job and come with adapters to suit most vehicles. See which one fits your wiper arm before attaching the new blade itself. Then it can be clipped on and you're ready to wipe. Here you can really see the difference. The hot Australian sun wasn't doing the old blades any favours. Now, this car is well overdue for an oil change and some general maintenance, so let's get it ready. Going in is some 15W40 that we got for a good price, and every oil change should be accompanied by a new oil filter. They're literally only a few dollars, and be sure to remove the plastic film, otherwise it won't be filtering very much. While we have the car up on the ramps, it's a good time to go over some of the common things to look out for on these Commodores. The engine mounts are prone to failure and sagging over time. These ones on here look pretty good as they have been replaced in recent years. Note the gap seen here. This is how it should look. Other parts that commonly fail are the tensioner pulley as well as the water pump. Now to drain the old oil, after letting the car warm up. The drain plug is located on the base of the oil pan, and be sure to remove it along with the washer. The filter in this car is a bit tricky to get to, so using a loosening tool helped with the removal. Be sure that the old filter comes off with the rubber ring. You don't want the old and new rubber seal to be on there, otherwise it'll leak like crazy. And with the new one lubricated, it can be tightened back into place. Doing it up as tight tight as possible by hand is enough, and the sump plug with washer can now be put back on. Make sure it is on securely. This car takes about 5 litres of oil. If you've got it up on a ramp, put most of it in before putting it back on flat ground and checking the level. I find having an old towel is useful for catching any oil left in the funnel, and it's best to back the car off the ramp very slowly so you don't damage the front bumper due to the low clearance. So let's see just how the old oil looks. Putting it into the now empty new oil bottle is best. It's also quite easy for the sump plug washer to fall in while it's being removed. But we had some new ones on hand, so this one is no longer needed. And we've got the oil level sitting pretty much perfectly. The transmission had been serviced quite recently, but it's always worth checking the fluid and its level. After wiping off the dipstick, we can see that it's a good red color and right on the correct indicator marker. Another part to check during a general service is the air filter, which sits inside the air intake. Several clips hold it in place. This one looks alright. I'll simply bash out any of the debris. This definitely has some more life left in it, and when flexing the air intake hose, be sure not to damage it and look for any splits which can cause airflow problems. It's also worth checking the cooling system once the car has completely cooled down. The level appears to be spot on in the radiator, but there should be a little more coolant in the reservoir. As we can see, it's definitely a bit low. There should be coolant up to the level between the triangles in the reservoir. It clearly needs a bit more, so fill it up until it sits at the correct level. The power steering fluid is also sitting at the correct level, just on the max fill line. The brake fluid also looks fine and is full. If you want your windscreen wiping to be a little more effective against bugs, put some concentrate in the tank. Fill the reservoir with water and try avoid spilling it everywhere like I did. With the car mechanically sound, I thought I would try using the pressure sprayer to remove all of the damaged clear coat. One side of the bonnet blasted off very easily. The spots it was peeling from were good places to spray. You wouldn't believe how satisfying this was to do. So the car was then driven around for several more months. And I was bored one day, so I thought I would try painting the bonnet with the leftover touch-up paint I had. I masked up the bodywork around the bonnet. By this time, the clear coat that remained was looking pretty bad. I simply started painting over what was still there. And I know this isn't how you're supposed to do it properly. I did sand back the clear coat though, which might have helped a bit. And the next day, after letting it dry overnight, it didn't look completely horrible, without a doubt better than before. Clearly, it's very dull. But what if I was to actually try and do a good job of it? Of course, the surface had a pretty big seam where the old clear coat was still on, and you could really tell where I accidentally blasted off the paint underneath. The original owner is going to get it stripped down and resprayed anyway, so there's no harm in giving it a go for the sake of this video. I sanded down the clear coat and some of the paint with varying grits of sandpaper, evening it out and removing any flaky edges. Some parts of the old clear coat did come off pretty easily with a razor blade thankfully, but this was incredibly time consuming when trying to do larger sections. I realized I wouldn't be able to peel off the half of the bonnet with the clear coat still on, so I sanded it down, then gave the whole surface a sanding with a very fine grit sandpaper in water. The next step was masking it all up to avoid getting paint on the other parts of the bodywork and windshield. Once all of the sanding and prep was done, I wiped it down with some wax and grease remover, which removes debris left on the surface. I ran out of the correct touch-up paint, so I ended up going with some cheap stuff that didn't match exactly with the rest of the bodywork. I applied several coats, allowing time for each to dry. I managed to get fairly even coverage, which wasn't easy given the breeze and the fact I was using spray cans. With a few layers of clear coat applied, it had some reflectiveness, but a buff and polish is still needed. I used 2 clear coat cans at once for more even coverage. It looks okay, not amazing. This was my first attempt at painting a bonnet. The divide between the clear coat I left on and the surface underneath isn't very noticeable, and the new clear coat seems pretty even. The wiper squirters I masked over are thankfully not covered with paint. So let's see how it matches the rest of the body. Well, it's definitely not very close. Either way, this was more of a learning experience for me, and I was aware that the blue paint I bought wasn't going to be an exact match. The original owner, as I said, is going to get it stripped down and repainted, so I just did it anyway. With the surface covered in some polish, it's now time for a buffing. I bought this cheap Azido orbital buffer cheap from Bunnings. Following the instructions, I moved it in large sweeping motions across the surface. It will definitely need a wash before its next use. The cheap buffer also comes with a beret, a little too small for me. It's actually called a polishing bonnet, which should get my car bonnet looking as shiny as it can be. And if you're ever doing this, be careful not to apply too much pressure. Let the buffer do all the work. And there we have it. It's far from perfect, but a huge improvement over the original faded and peeling clear coat. Once again, I was aware that the paint I was using wasn't going to be a very close match, but it was the difference between spending like $7 a can and upwards of $35 for the proper color match stuff. Last of all, I applied a ceramic coating, which will help protect the paint and repel water. Another thing that needs attention is the very fogged over headlights. First of all, I masked around the edges, then sanded the lens with rough 320 grit sandpaper, followed by sanding with a finer sandpaper. At this point, the lens looks pretty scratched up, but that's totally normal. After applying some cut and polish, I cleaned the lens off with wax and grease remover. Now the clear coat can go on, and after a few coats, it definitely looks a lot better. This is a pretty cheap way to restore sun-damaged headlights, and as I learned, masking up more of the surrounding paint is probably a good idea to avoid clear coat overspray. Now, how good is this car for daily use? Inside, it's simple and completely original right down to the tape player. Dials are super easy to control and understand without looking at them while driving. Something to note is that the steering wheel material is starting to melt a bit. It's somewhat sticky even after cleaning. Another common issue with these cars is a sagging headliner. The foam underneath literally turns to dust, and to stop more of the powdery foam falling out and potentially breathing it in, I simply stapled it back up in place, which actually worked pretty well. While cosmetically, it has seen better days, where it excels is on the road. Acceleration is very responsive. If you put your foot down, it'll go without hesitation. You honestly feel like you're in control. The steering has a nice weight to it. The independent rear suspension is stiff, and it's very comfortable for cruising around. I feel like the smooth curves and rounded design have aged pretty well. While it looks pretty aerodynamic, the 3.8 litre V6 means it's never going to get great fuel economy. That being said, it does perform well at highway speeds, where its fuel economy, I guess, is at its best. When city driving and in urban traffic conditions, expect upwards of 12 litres per 100 kilometres. Inside the cabin, it's very quiet. Great insulation means barely any road noise. And while this model doesn't even have power windows, it does have central locking and a rather odd looking key. Practicality is also excellent with heaps of boot space. I really found myself wanting to drive this car and get out on the road. This car gives you a very appealing freedom, knowing that you don't have to worry about scratches and dents or other cars bumping into you in the parking lot. And if maintained correctly, these are very reliable and robust vehicles. However, a lot of ones for sale online have been absolutely thrashed. Be on the lookout for one that hasn't been modified, and ideally one with lower kilometres. Expect to pay upwards of 3,000 Australian dollars for a good example. Will these become collectible one day? Absolutely. It's one of the great Australian Holdens, made for the everyday Aussie and every hoon looking to do some burnouts. So there we have it, an old Australian car that definitely doesn't look the best, but it mechanically runs like a clock. So it should be drivable for many more years. It's definitely smooth, comfortable, and has a lot of power. And if you're in the market for one of these, most of them have sadly been trashed. This one is a survivor and owned by someone who drove it like a granny, and even he'll admit that's how he drove it. Thanks for watching. If you like car content, I may have another car video coming up in the future, but that's a bit of a secret. So have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.